Hey, everybody. Welcome to Coming and Going, the podcast that is designed to be a biblical guide to your parenting journey. My name is Joe Crabb, and I had the privilege and honor of both being the host of this podcast as well as a pastor who ministers directly at Woodside Bible Church. I get the privilege and opportunity of worshiping and working at Woodside of Troy, but also just being a representative in these conversations for all of our staff team. As we look to essentially be found faithful as brothers and sisters in Christ, to spur each other on to love and good works, to encourage one another, to bear with one another, to pray with one another, as we are looking to be good stewards of the gifts of grace that God has given us in our children. And so know that if you are tuning in, I am no parenting expert, but one who has been saved by grace and grateful to be able to share with you from the mistakes that I've made, the grace that I've received, as well as to facilitate conversation with amazing brothers and sisters in Christ who, whether they be parents themselves, and oftentimes they are, or professionals in a certain field, also have that desire to glorify God by sharing their giftings, their insights, their grace, so that we may, again, be good stewards of these gifts that God has given us in our children. And so thank you, as always, for tuning in. We hope that this podcast is always as an encouragement to you as you are looking to raise your sons and daughters as young men and young women after God's own heart. And so grateful for the conversation that we will have today. Our topic at hand is understanding and navigating trauma as parents. And hearing that, some of you may instantly think, hey, well, I don't know about anything traumatic that me and my family have gone through. And totally understand that that might not be a season that you are in, but we know that life ebbs and flows, and it might be a season that you find yourself in one day, or your family finds itself in as you are bearing with friends or other family members who find themselves going through difficult situations. We don't have to look too far to the left or right of us to find brokenness in this world. And so I know that regardless of what phase you may find yourself in as a parent, and the phase of life your family is in, that today's conversation with a friend of Woodside, a member of Woodside, and a professional in her field, Liz Strong will be. And so I'm going to go ahead and give a little cue up here to Liz. I got a little guest bio I'm excited to read, and then we'll hop formally into the conversation. But Liz is a clinical social worker who has been practicing since 2009, working in the community mental health system in Wayne and Macomb counties. She predominantly works with children and families and those connected to the child welfare foster care system, including infant mental health. She's trained in dialectical behavioral therapy. I hope I got that dialect correct. When she's not counseling kids and families, she's teaching social work as a professor at Oakland University. She's also a wife to Jason and a mom to two beautiful little girls. So Liz, thank you so much for being on the podcast. First time on the pod, not first time on any Woodside content, but first time on the pod. How are you doing today, Liz?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Liz, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time out of your day to be an encouragement to others. And I hope that for the parents listening, that this time is encouraging, insightful as they look to lead their kids through the different seasons of life that they might directly find themselves in or indirectly find themselves in as they live in community with others. As we know, part of being a parent means being there for the most joyous moments in your child's life, but it also means being just as ready to be there for the most difficult moments too. And we know that's something that happens in any phase of life, regardless of how old your kids are. As Liz and I can probably both tell you, when it comes to our moms never stop momming. They just do it all the time. But that's part of the role that we take on, and we know that we take it on as parents ourselves. Because as parents, we want to protect our children from all the bad things that can happen in this world. But the hard truth that we have to accept is we know that we can't. We can only prepare them as well as we can and be prepared ourselves to respond as well as we can and to show grace when we both might fail in doing so. So sometimes our kids experience things that kids should never have to experience. And so today we're going to be diving into a topic that we've already talked about that affects many families directly or indirectly, and that's how to help our children navigate trauma. So Liz, as we start this convo, let's provide a baseline for our listeners by understanding what trauma is. Could you give us a definition?
Absolutely. I would say in a nutshell, there's a lot to it, but really it's any situation or experience that somebody goes through that causes them to feel as though they are in severe, extreme danger, that they might be in danger of losing their life. And it usually includes some sort of feeling of a loss of control. The biggest thing with trauma, especially as it pertains to our children, is that there's a very important component where like our perception of an event or a person or a situation is just as important in defining trauma as the event itself. So, for instance, if two people are in a car accident, person might walk away from that and be like, "Oh, that sucked," moving forward. The other person may need help getting into a car the next time they have to go somewhere. So that's really an important thing to keep in mind. Something else I wanted to add in this definition is that for kids who may struggle with some like sensory issues, and that's a lot of kids, it's not necessarily any one diagnosis. Sometimes, like being bombarded with like sensory overload can actually be traumatic for kids because they can't control it. So sometimes that's like a hidden area of trauma that we don't always think about.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. This is because it's our baseline for for the listener. If maybe you were driving and you didn't get fully, this is a perfect time to hit like the rewind 15 seconds a couple of times or whatever to get that baseline definition. Because what you just shared there too, you're talking about both a real experience that an individual could go through as well as their perspective. And I think there's sometimes a dissonance there for parents because the way that a parent has experienced something or their perspective on it is not in line with their kid. And so it can create a dissonance in the conversations that they're trying to have or empathy they're trying to show or how they're even trying to lead their kid through that difficult situation. Because for a parent, their perspective would be, that wasn't that big of a deal, or that wasn't you, or that's not how it actually happened. But I love how you're talking there. Being mindful of that perspective allows you to know how to potentially proceed with that person because some might be able to hop right back in the car and some might be hesitant too. But how do you show care and help to both? And so we're talking a little bit into it, but what are some of those other signs as well that parents should be mindful of and recognizing in their kids when it comes to trauma? Recognizing signs of trauma in our kids.
Something that we really want to look for, we want to look for more of a pattern of behavior rather than like a one-off rough day. Um, obviously, like my kids, they end up staying up kind of late on Monday nights. So Tuesdays are rough. They're sensitive. They're emotional. We have a tough time getting to school on Tuesdays. But they didn't go through anything traumatic. They just didn't get enough sleep. So what we're looking for is we want to look for some emotional changes, so a pattern of behavior emotionally. So this could be like new fears about things. Maybe they have some what we call emotional blunting or like a shutdown of emotions. A kid who was once very bright and cheerful and joyous is now just kind of like numb, or like they just look like there's nothing happening. We really want to pay attention to that. That's a big one. Alternatively, we also want to look and see if a kid all of a sudden who was able to kind of roll with the punches is becoming very emotional about things that we may perceive as being minor. Put your shoes on, and like just a big tearful response, and you're like, what is going on here? If you see that your child is like isolating themselves, maybe from you, maybe other family members, maybe from friends that they've been close to on a regular basis, that's something we want to pay attention to. If a child is really avoiding a person, a place, activity, we want to know more about that. Another thing that we might see is an increase in irritability and aggression. Trauma is an anxiety response. And a lot of times, anxiety doesn't come out as fear or worry, it comes out as irritability. I don't want to talk about that. So, when something reminds me of it, now I'm irritated and I might become actually more angry than you've seen me in the past. There's also some physical symptoms. So, if your kid is regularly having stomach aches, headaches, a change in their sleep, more sleep disturbance, lots more nightmares, night terrors, perhaps like a regression in certain toileting behaviors. Um, the other one is just a change in appetite as well. So where it's like, once again, a pattern of behavior, not just like, okay, today, if things were a little funky, it's like, wow, like I've noticed consistently for the past few weeks, my child has been acting differently, and it's been these physical responses. We do want to make sure that we get that ruled out by a medical doctor because there could be some sort of physiological issue, but those are sometimes the signs that come out. There's a whole book called The Body Keeps Score. And so our body sometimes is the first sign that something's going wrong.
Yeah. Oh my, it's wild, all the studies and the science behind physiologically and physically how our bodies respond to that, especially I think in this the heightened state that we have been living in over the past few years has probably highlighted that all the more. And seeing it highlighted all the more within this particular demographic of kids and students who we know are going through some of the greatest physical and physiological and mental and emotional changes. And so I appreciate the baseline because that lets us know, uh, gives us a working understanding, and then obviously the signs lets us, okay, is this something that's now expressing itself physically? Is it emotionally? Is it a pattern over time? And trying to help again, kind of pull apart some of the things because we're also dealing with reality at the time with our kids is that it can be hard to get them to verbalize, especially if this is perhaps your first time as a parent hearing some of this stuff, navigating through it, potentially leading a kid through a conversation or being aware of it. It's also your kid's first time experiencing something, and they may not have the language yet to use to verbalize the way that they're feeling, or they don't fully understand the language that they have to use to kind of share what's been going on. So, talking a little bit more, we're talking baseline, some diagnosis or some symptoms, some signs to look for, so to say. Let's take it that next step here. So a parent maybe like, I have seen some of these things, or I know outright through our experience with a counselor, a kid is dealing with some issues of trauma with, again, a lot of the stuff that's even just been going on in our world and in our Metro Detroit area the past couple of years. Well, what are some helpful tools, some coping strategies that you would recommend for kids, for students, obviously for their parents to be mindful of, who are processing their own trauma, and again, how parents can help support them through that?
Yeah, I think, if you're aware of, like, that your child has been through something traumatic, I think that's a really good time to really start looking at getting your child into some sort of counseling. That's a great first step because parents, friends, family members, the most loving, supportive people sometimes just aren't equipped to know the correct steps to take in helping the child be treated for that trauma. And I will say, what you were mentioning about like kind of the heightened state of our world and things, especially Metro Detroit, that our children have been through. Sometimes it's really tough to find a therapist. So just because you start looking for one today, you might not start therapy for another 3 to 6 months, unfortunately, depending on, the situation. And unfortunately, a lot of therapists actually don't work with children. And so that makes it especially hard. So the sooner you start looking, the sooner you're able to get your child into some sort of counseling. Parents may also want to go to their own counseling to learn, how do I process my reactions to what my child has been through? Because as a parent, you might be struggling, and like you might not know what to do with your own feelings, and you want to be able to be a rock for your child, but really, you've got a lot going on inside of you. So I think that's a great first place to start. But once we pursue that route, just know that trauma is under the umbrella of anxiety. So anything that we do that can help us with our anxiety will also actually help us generally with our trauma. So one of the most important things that we can teach children is to learn, how do we calm down? How do we like relax? Because if we are heightened, we're not going to be able to process what we need to when it comes to dealing with a traumatic experience. So we need to be able to bring ourselves down and to be in a regulated state in order to process what we've been through or just even get through the day. So I would say, any type of like calming activity. YouTube has a ton of free stuff. Um, there's things like progressive muscle relaxation. Honestly, if you just type in like calm activity before
Yeah.
bed,
Calm
you're gonna get
stretch. I'm sure you'll get a
exactly.
bunch of hits.
We just did one the other day, and it was like an unwind, and they had kids kind of like unwind their fingers and their hands and their body. But anything like that can be really helpful. Deep breathing. Sometimes just getting your kid to do some sort of like slow, calm physical activity. So, like going for a walk. Sometimes they have like slow movement activities that you can do, via YouTube or any other types of apps that you use. Any kind of slow movement can be good for kids because it gives them that sense of control back. So that's especially good with trauma. Another thing that I love to teach pretty much all of my clients is there's a theory called polyvagal theory. I'm not going to go into it right now. Uh, this is a lot. But basically, we have this nerve called our vagus nerve. If we can take care of the vagus nerve, it can actually help to regulate our brain and regulate our emotions. So, if you want to Google some exercises, vagus, VAGUS, for calming that nerve down, and some of them are similar to what we just talked about, but things like singing, humming, once again, deep breathing, that slow movement, like sometimes having like temperature change, so getting in a cold shower, those sensory experiences, that can be helpful, especially if we're getting into that more panic side of our anxiety or our stress over certain situations. Something I do want to mention is just that for some kids who've been through trauma, the idea of sitting still is extremely overwhelming for them. So, what we want to do is we want to find what your child is motivated by and what they're interested in. We don't want to force them to do like deep breathing because if they get too calm, their brain might open the doors, or they might be afraid that their brain will open the doors to bad memories coming back to them. So they might want to avoid that.
Well, that's also a good thing to be mindful of with what you shared earlier in regards to the baseline definition, this feeling of being out of control, and providing them with options that could be those coping mechanisms that express themselves either in a calm way or in a more controlled physical way is also giving them at the same time opportunity for control because you're empowering them to make a decision, which would hopefully also help with some of the heightened states that they might be in. We have a few more questions here. And I think when you first said answering that question, is if your kid has gone through a traumatic experience, and we talked about it at the start of the episode, sometimes it's direct. Like we know, oh, this is something traumatic. My kid has gone in through, the death of a family member, the loss of a dad's job or mom's job or something like those can be traumatic for a kid. We also know, and especially because of the peer-to-peer relationship, that a lot of times that traumatic experience is something else that the kid, a friend has gone through or community has gone through. I'm at the Troy campus. We minister a lot just directly to the Troy kids here, obviously all affected a ton by the shooting that took place in Oxford. And although we didn't have a lot of kids directly from this campus, this church location at Oxford, we dealt indirectly with a lot of kids, a lot of students dealing with a lot of trauma over the school shooting that occurred because there was, obviously a couple of copycat threats afterwards, but just that heightened state. So these baseline definitions, these questions and symptoms and signs, and this mindfulness of as a parent, I think is so important to remember because although it might not be directly with your kid and something that they're going through, or your family is going through, we live in a global world. We are hyper connected with each other, more so than we have ever been, more so than you as a parent have ever been. You might have been on the internet longer than your kid, but you're at the same speed as they are today, if they're on the internet at all. And so I think just those mindfulness things are so huge because it's easy just to think, well, it's not my kid, so therefore it did not affect them, or it's not my school, so therefore it did not affect them, or whatever that issue might be. So, obviously we have some great practical tools that we've been giving them, some great thought process for parents to be thinking through. Liz, I'd love for you to share with us some biblical principles that can help guide parents in supporting their children through these difficult times.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to remind your children, as we turn to the word when we are talking with them, whether it is that indirect trauma or that direct trauma that we're aware of, is remembering that God is our refuge, our safe place. So even directing your children to, and even as a family, reading stories in the Bible. I mean, I think younger children definitely like resonate a lot with story, and even sometimes our older kids have kind of gotten away from Bible stories, and even reminding them to read some of those again can be helpful. But anything where a favorite Bible character, is being helped by God, like going through a tough time. I think about like Elijah, right? When he like the fire happens, then he runs away, right? And
Super
like that,
traumatic.
yeah, yeah.
Very much so.
He's exactly, he's being chased by all these people, like, that's so terrifying, but, like, God comes to him, right? And not, like, the booming voice of God, but that still small voice, And so remembering that God is our safe place, our refuge, we can be under his wings, especially initially in trauma, that's really, I think, the most important focus, to really think about God as our refuge. I think too, like there may be a time and a place to talk about forgiveness. But I really want to encourage parents to wait on that. Wait till the child brings it up. Wait till that's a topic that, that child has processed enough of their trauma or their experiences before we get to there. I think sometimes, especially in our God-fearing circles, we want to instill biblical principles in our children, and certainly forgiveness is one of those. But we want to be mindful of children and like how quickly we're pushing them on that particular area. They may need time to just feel and express and struggle. This also may be a time when your children come up with questions like, if God is so good, why does he allow bad things to happen? Whew, and that's some deep theological questioning. I think it's okay as parents to say, you know what? I don't always know, but why don't we figure this out together? Like partnering with your child as you pursue that type of questioning.
That's good. That's good. I think on that point too about forgiveness, I think we've all been there. One on the end of a parent where a kid apologizes for something, and we're like, "Yeah, but did you mean it?" But in the same way, we know the importance of them being able to forgive, but we want them to be able to forgive and mean it. And like you said, if they're especially if they've been on the other side of a traumatic experience with somebody that trauma has happened directly to them and they're the victim of it, but getting to a point of acceptance, forgiveness, and it's a difficult thing. It's a lot easier at times to rip the Band-Aid off and then have them heal, but to say, hey, how are we helping them heal so that Band-Aid in some ways kind of falls naturally off? Uh, and how do we help them explore and lead them through the nuances of like, how do you forgive somebody when you can't forget what they've done? How do you forgive someone when you're still feeling those residual feelings? And ultimately pointing it back to the example that Christ gives to us. So that becomes all the more their strength, their refuge, their help as they're looking to navigate the situations they're going through. I think it's great that we've started here kind of directly in the home. We've been talking about some direct trauma, some indirect trauma, but how parents are looking to navigate their kids through these seasons directly. But we know that part of it is the trauma other friends might be going through, or families, extended family might be going through, or community might be going through. And so, in that end, how should a student, a kid, approach a friend who has experienced trauma? And what's guidance can parents offer to help their children support their peers? This is often the one that I got the most as a pastor. It wasn't a kid directly struggling with thoughts of self-harm or directly had a loss in their family. It was my best friend's dad just passed away, or this situation happened. So what are some good frameworks, tools for those kids, students, and parents who are helping minister to others who might be going through a difficult season?
I think, if your child is aware, like my friend or someone in my circle has gone through something that is or potentially is traumatic, The best thing that we can do is to, like, as friends and loved ones, is to come around that kid and just support for normalcy, right? Like, I might not want to
Or for
talk about.
normalcy. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we wanna support that normalcy for that kid. They sometimes kids don't wanna talk about it all the time, they don't wanna think about it all the time. That is what home can be for or counseling can be for. And so, like, I think, the best thing you can do as a friend is just to invite your friends to stuff or, like, maybe go out of your way to say, "Hey, like, would you wanna hang out this weekend?" Or, "Hey, my family does, like, a movie night on Fridays. Do you wanna just come join us?" And just allow them space to do regular kid stuff. And like when you build those relationships, when you're spending time with someone, that opens the door then to have those organic conversations where that kid might be like, I'm really struggling. Like I'm having a hard time. That may not be how they word it, but like a version of that. And so as the friend or the loved one of that kid, you can just listen. You're not gonna be able to fix it. You can't solve the problem, but what we can do is listen well and really just validate, "Wow, that had to be so hard. I'm so sorry you went through that. I wish there's something I could do to make things better for you." Those are great phrases to use when somebody is opening up about how they feel.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, what as a parent, as you're navigating that as well with a student, let's say your student's coming to you and say, my friend's going through a difficult time, and it can be a hard thing. Like, what can you best equip your kid to do? And that is one, be present, like you just shared, uh, but also like point them back to where they can get better help from. Um, a lot of times students like don't want to feel like they're betraying the trust of a friend. And it's actually, well, that's coming from that good sentiment because you care for them. In caring for them, if you don't say something about the situation they're in or point them to where they can get help, you're actually doing an uncaring thing because you're leaving them in a potentially harmful or hurtful situation. And so parents, when that tension comes up, how do you navigate that? I don't want them to feel like they're betraying trust. Like, well, all the core sentiment that your kid is actually having there is they love the person they're talking to you about and they're trying to figure out the most caring thing to do. And then that kind of helps you navigate you're not betraying their trust. We're actually going to figure out what's the most caring thing to do. And we could just be forthright with them and say, we want to be caring for you. And this is how we're going to try and help to care if and when you find, those, yourself in that, but just I can resonate personally firsthand. My dad passed away in 2007 from a heart attack. We're in the hospital for however long. And it will always stick with me that I had a friend who was there. And for many days, he just sat there. Did it? He did like, hey, man, we should talk about this. He just physically sat there. And we'd go eat food or we'd go back to my house and maybe watch a show or something like normalcy in some sense. So it seems so silly because in the moment, because the situation's heightened, we often feel like our response should be heightened. So it's like, I've never gotten together a blanket drive for 4,000 people, but I'm going to do it because my friend is in need of a blanket. It's like, yeah, but you could also just show up with a one. Um, our former senior pastor, still pastor who ministers here, Pastor Dave Anderson, will often tell followers of Christ when it comes to discerning the will of God that the question often is, or the guiding principle is, do the next obvious thing for the glory of God. I think when it comes to caring for people, and especially in these situations, sometimes all we can do is like, what's the next obvious thing we can do for their good? And when we do that, then we're doing it for the glory of God, as opposed to feeling like situation's heightened, I'm heightened, I need my response to be heightened. Show up, be present, point them back to the truth of who God is. And so super, super helpful stuff, Liz. This has been a super encouraging conversation. And so as we get ready to kind of wrap up, love for you to share any final thoughts, especially, as it comes to any other thoughts about effective ways for parents to communicate with their children about trauma, how they can create a safe space for their kids to express their feelings.
Yeah, I think Just to kind of add on to what you were talking about, thank you so much for bringing that up because I did want to say, it's okay for kids to set those boundaries, right? To say, I don't know how to talk with you about this. This is way bigger than me. And certainly I think that's so important because I think sometimes, especially some of the kids I've talked to, they feel so responsible for their friends. And we want to make sure that they're not taking on more than they can handle. So I appreciate you bringing that piece up. As it comes to, parents helping their kids navigate, whether it's their child's trauma or, the collective trauma of a community or just a friend, um, I think it's really important to make sure that your communication channels are open with your kids and that you set the stage for them to see you as a safe person. If they start bringing something up and we're like, oh yeah, oh no, we don't talk about that. Like they're not going to feel safe to share with you the deeper things. And so we want to be able to ask certain questions of our children as we, move forward. Obviously, there's some tragedies that happen that we cannot stop, but there are some things that are preventable that we can keep in mind. We might want to be like, especially with our younger children, asking questions like, is there anybody in your life who makes you feel uncomfortable? Are there any places where you feel uncomfortable? Just because your kid has an answer, it doesn't mean that the worst is happening, but it opens the door for you to get more information from them. My oldest daughter, I'm a therapist and she hates talking about her feelings. Uh, and I'm always like, but mommy talks about feelings. But a lot of times she will keep stuff locked up, right? So with her, I'm always reminding her that if she keeps it inside, that's not healthy for her body. That's not healthy for her brain. And when she's ready, I want to be here for her when she wants to talk about something. 9 times out of 10, it comes out like 2 weeks later while we're driving to or from school. And so, but I've set the stage for her to know that she can talk about it when she's ready, and I know I can't force her. I wish I could, but I can't force her to talk about anything. So we just want to make sure that we really focus on listening first, reacting later. So if we listen, we want to hear their feelings and speak to those feelings. So, mom, my friend's dad just passed away. Like, what do I do? Wow, you really care about your friend. You're really concerned that they're okay right now. I love that part of you. I love that that's your character. Yeah. Why don't we brainstorm some ideas? What are you thinking? And then the conversation can go from there.
That's good. That's really good. That's good. I think, Sue, sometimes parents have to remember when it comes to wanting to listen or ask the questions, like you said, I can't force her to say it. But sometimes you probably felt like you have been trying to, or playing like a little bit too forceful or coercive. Or I know I have with my daughter. Like, come on, I want to know. Dad needs to know this, or like all this stuff, or like maybe I have responded the best when she was sharing something. You can always apologize. You can always just tell them like, hey, I hope you know that you can always tell me something. And if I've ever responded poorly, I apologize for that. And I know like, it's okay to give that power over. Sometimes it feels so difficult to do, to feel like, oh, well, no, like I shouldn't. Like that's on them. That's their perspective. Y'all, they're 6 or they're 16. Like you're 40. And truly, if your end in mind is cultivating a greater culture of peace for your family, and that's what you have to do to make peace, aren't you glad that Christ didn't have a limit for you when it came to making peace with you?
And
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think remembering Christ humbled himself to come to earth and die on the cross. How then can we humble ourselves and model humility for our children? Sometimes it is by saying, I messed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Even if you don't feel like you messed up. Again, full circle back to that perspective. And the perspective of your 6-year-old or 16-year-old is going to be different than yours. But if you can walk away from a situation saying, is there something I could have done even a little bit better? If I didn't do anything wrong, but I could have done it better, well, there's room for growth, room for humility, and let that be what prevails and what we model to our kids. Liz, this has been so encouraging to be a part of. I can't thank you enough for the work that you do in the community, in the church, in your home, and for those listening here today. For those of you who are listening here today, we, as always, are here to help be of any sort of encouragement to you, providing resources and tools from the content that's created directly here at Woodside, but as well as if you're in the Metro Detroit area or abroad, we can potentially help you get even more connected to resources, whether counselor recommendations or just how to navigate these difficult conversations all the more. That is what we're here to do. We're never too busy to stop and help others. And so if there's any way that we can be of help to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. But again, we hope this has been an encouragement to you. If so, please share it with others. And as always, know that we love you, we're here for you, and we are praying for you as you are coming and going.